one of the ways that I tried to do this, it's not completely foolproof, but I'll share it with you anyway, was an approach where I realized that at any point, if I wasn't fully truthful with myself, I would go off track. I would veer into an area that was feeding more into what I wanted or what I thought I needed more than what was right for me. Usually leaned more into what I wanted, and it was short-term wants. Yeah, it was that gratification, instant gratification. Yeah, usually it could be all sorts of different ways. Yeah, and I began to realize that whenever I did that, whenever I veered off track in that, when I didn't do right by me, it ultimately brought me around to another crossroads where I'd be faced with the same situation again. Or a similar situation where this time I had a little bit more experience under my belt. And this time I had an opportunity to really do right by me. And this stuff isn't easy. When we're used to the ego being very strong and the wants are always leading, or we want the easy outcome, or we want the way that feels happier in the short term, it's very, very easy to veer off track with that. So when I began to notice that every time I do this, every time I just follow what I want, I get what I want, but it doesn't always work out well. Yeah. A lot of times it would end up in some kind of disaster. That's being a bit dramatic, but it just didn't get me what I really needed. Yeah. So I made a sort of a pact with myself to, as much as possible, do right by me by being honest with myself as much as I could. And that was really hard. Because as soon as I started looking inside, I could hear that inner roommate voice really loudly. And that voice, for me, a lot of the time was very self-critical. It was very judgmental. It was very harsh. So whenever I would make a mistake, like kind of what I'm describing, following what I wanted to do and hoping that, maybe it'll work out better this time, but it didn't. That inner voice would be really, really hard on me. Be like, you should have known. You've already done this, and it's worked out the same. Like, what the hell were you thinking? People are not going to respect you. You can't let anybody know about this. All this stuff. And then it would start feeding into shameful kind of feelings, or it would just run down any little shred of confidence that I might have built up. It just starts kind of wearing that away. So initially practicing honesty wasn't so easy, because that's the first thing that I began to hear from inside. And I still wasn't any closer to knowing what felt really right for me. But I had to look at that first. I had to let myself hear that inner voice, and however that sounded, in order to be able to address it. When I began to really sort of question it, when I found a way not so much to kind of conversate with it, is that even a word? Converse, that's the one. It wasn't even so much about finding a way to converse with it, but it was finding a way that I challenged it. So when that inner voice was being really harsh and really critical of me, some other part of me had a voice that said, well, look, you did your best there. And it wasn't maybe the greatest decision that you've ever made, but it's not all lost. You learned something. Those little statements were enough to just gain a little bit of ground. It just gave me a little bit of a foothold that, okay, so next time something like this happens, I'm going to really follow my intuition or my instinct. I would nearly say that it was essential that I made the mistakes to be able to know what that feeling felt like, that I could correct it. If I'd gotten it right, straight off, I don't think I would have as much wisdom about it. I don't think that would serve me longer term without the negative experience. Because for me, I don't know how you guys are built, but for me, right, part of how I learned to do right by me was learning how painful it was to do wrong by me. Mm-hmm. And that was a really good deterrent. Not just go with what you wanted to do, yeah, like stay out till 4 instead of 2 or something like that. Sometimes it was that kind of decision, yeah. Or 6, whatever. AM, yeah. It was a necessary part of the learning to be able to say, okay, I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to wake up like that. I don't want to feel like that about myself. And this applied to everything, yeah? Work relationships, couple relationships, everything. Learning by not doing right by me. I still didn't know a whole lot about how to do right by me, but I was learning a whole heap of things about what happened when I did wrong by me. And some of that was disguised as feeling like I was doing the right thing by somebody else. Like in relationships, we want to please our partner. We want to facilitate, we want to accommodate, all of that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of times that I made mistakes in being over-accommodating or over-compromising because I didn't know that piece of how it felt to do right by me. I didn't know enough about me and maybe what I needed or what was important for me to be able to hold to that. So that whole piece of the courage to do right by me, it involves quite a few different ways of how I get to know me. Through my ups, my downs, my mistakes, all of that. But if that's our goal, so even if we're starting at a point like, I don't know the first thing to start that. If we ultimately have a goal of, I really want to do right by me as much as I possibly can. And I want to practice that more and more, that it becomes really consistent. That I can really recognize that feeling and recognize if I make a mistake in that. Because it's inevitable it will happen. A lot of the time we'll feel it afterwards. After we say something, after we do something, oh, that didn't feel right. That doesn't feel right. It took me a very long time. And I'm sure there was things like, I don't know, my pride in the way or whatever, that wouldn't let me roll back once I'd made a particular decision. If I made a decision to do something, to go somewhere or whatever, or act in a particular way, and then it didn't feel right, my old way was like, oh, you've decided it now, so you just have to keep going. Yeah? It's like when you take a wrong turn in the road, so just keep going, You'll eventually come around. But sure, that takes ages. It took me a long time to give myself that permission, that as soon as I recognized, that doesn't feel right, the permission to make an adjustment, to change it right. I don't know why that took such an amount of effort or amount of time to allow that. And maybe it was partly an ego thing of, well, you've decided this now, you have to live with the consequences. This kind of stuff. All these teachings and things that we absorb from society or family culture or things like that. But for me, that courage to do right by me, part of that, intrinsic to that, is that very free permission to change something as soon as it doesn't feel right. As soon as possible that it doesn't feel right for me, I give myself the permission to change it. Something that we have inbuilt in all of us as part of our survival strategy. Yeah? And our survival strategy is that we feel safe when we belong to something. Yeah? So it's when we belong to, it might be family, it might be a particular group of friends, or even in a job or something like that, a relationship, all of that. We feel safe when we're in that, because to go out on our own, so in nature terms, we're much more vulnerable. Yes, something could kill us and eat us. That's kind of how we're programmed to survive that. So as part of being part of a group feels safer to us, and that's why we learn how to play that game. That's how we learn how to play, I'll just belong here because the group keeps me safe. Yeah? One of the things about following spiritual path and meditation, or any area that we're working on ourselves, could be through therapy, through yoga, whatever it is, our energy starts to expand. And at a certain point, what used to feel comfortable can start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. It can start to feel a little bit like, okay, so I'm interested in whatever, and my friends aren't interested in that anymore. Oh, what do I do? Who do I play with? Or who do I share that with? Where's my belonging now? And we can feel in a sort of a limbo area, because we're kind of going out a little bit on a limb. And that can feel really risky for us. That can feel so risky at times that we would choose to stay in something that actually no longer fits or no longer feels right for us, just because it feels safe or feels familiar. So there's a dual aspect in this. So when we're practicing meditation, like in the way that we practice it with mantra, yes, part of the journey is how we're expanding our energy as we're getting to know more and more about ourselves. But along with that comes a discovery of our strength. And it's that part where we're discovering what we can handle. When we're discovering our strength, that starts to give us more choices. When we start to trust our ability to cope with things or handle changes, it's a lot easier to have that courage to do right by us. So whether it's the courage to whatever, you're doing something different than the group is allowing, whatever the group culture is or the family culture is, you're doing something a little bit different than that.